We go. Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Mem Chet. And let me share my screen and we will get started. We are in the middle of discussing the extent to which my inviting you into my property, right? So I invite you into my property, and you have an animal. We can say it's an ox, and you bring your ox into my property. So I invited you. Does that mean that if something I have in my property, let's say my dog bites your ox, am I going to be liable because I invited you in? So you should feel safe. Or do we say, no, I invited you in, Mark. I didn't guarantee the safety of your property. You need to watch your ox and be careful about it. So that's the discussion that we're in the middle of. And we're talking about what kind of dog was it? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not a big dog person, so I don't know. We can just say it was a pit bull because pit bulls are very often they bite people. So and things, and so we'll say that there was a pit bull that you needed to know I have a pit bull, and so as a result, that's the question: is do you need to watch out for it? So all right, so let's take a look. So we're at the two dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the bottom of Mem Zayin Amabet. Again, today's daf is Mem Chet. And so the Gemara wonders. Oh, wow, that's a nice dog. The Gemara wonders regarding the extent of a, oh boy, that's terrible. I should fix that typo. The extent of a landowner's commitment to protect something in his property. So let's take a look. So if I say that I'm going to guard something that you leave in my property, Mahu. So here's the question that we're starting with, Mark. The question is if your ox is now in my field, and so I told you I'm going to watch it. Now, when I say that I'm going to watch it, am I only watching it from things that I own? So from my dog. But what happens if Lori comes in with her dog? And she comes in and her dog bites your ox. So have I told you that I'm protecting you from that? That's the question of the Gemara. So we're going to try to answer it twice. We will be unsuccessful each times. And we're going to yeah, well, we'll have a little bit of Rashi, we'll have a little bit of Tosos, so we'll see, we'll take a look at it. So let's take a look. So Tashma Ditani Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon Benizkin Debe Karna. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon was teaching a brisa about Nezikin at the yeshiva of Karna, and Hichnis, and here's what he said: Hichnis Perosav Lechatzer Bal Habayis Shalo Bershus. If somebody brings fruit into my, we'll assume that we're all coming into my field. So somebody brings fruit into my field without permission. They don't have permission to bring their fruit into my field. And well, we're going to find out. And now an ox that Lori brings in comes and eats it. So what happens? Patur, somebody's exempt. So right now we're going to assume that I'm exempt. However, if, however, Mark, I gave you permission to bring the fruit in, well, then chayav. Then, again, we're assuming right now that the one who's obligated, who's liable, is me, the landowner. So man pater uman chayav. Who is it that is pater and chayav in this brisa? Lav pater bal hachatzer v'chayav bal hachatzer. Isn't it the owner of the field, meaning that I'm going to be liable if I invite Mark in with his fruit, and I'm not going to be liable if I don't invite Mark in with his fruit. And I'm liable even though the person whose animal did the damage is Lori. And so as a result, that's the question. So haven't I answered the question? So no, I have not answered the question. But before we get to that, let's take a look at a question that Tosos asked. The last Tosos on Mem Zayin Mabet, my lav pater balachatzer v'chaya balachatzer v'im tomar v'yelech v'yitba mibala shor. Why is Mark claiming from me? Shouldn't he be claiming from Lori? Right, exactly, because it's Lori's animal who ate your fruit. So why shouldn't? Right? Exactly. Shame on you, Lori. No, we're just joking. V'yesh lomer kagon dahu shor havi shel chereshota v'katan. So it could be that the shore didn't when it didn't actually belong to Lori as an adult. It belonged to Lori when she was a child, and as a child, she's not going to be liable. Delav b'nei tashlumin because a minor, somebody who is unable to speak and hear, and somebody who is not well psychologically, all of them are unable to be liable. Inami zeh yitba min balachotzer, ubalachotzer yitba min balashur. Or it could just be easier for you, Mark, to claim from me, and then I would have to claim from Lori. So those are the two answers to Tosas's question as to why not just go directly to Lori. So, but in any event, Umri, they said, lo, it is not in fact me who's liable. Pater Bal Hashor, the one who we're saying is not going to be liable, is Lori. Lori's not going to be liable if you bring your fruit in without permission, Mark. V'chaya Bal Hashor, and Lori will be liable if you bring your fruit in with permission. The Bal Hashor, well, 1 second. If we're saying that we're talking about Lori as we turn to Mem Chadam and Aleph, my Bershus or my Lo Shalo Bershusika. Who cares whether I gave Mark permission to bring in the fruit? The question is whether Lori's animal ate the fruit, and it did. So Umri, no, in fact, it does make a difference whether I gave permission, because Birishus, Havila Shane Birishus Anizak. Because if in fact I gave permission, well, then it's like the damage of eating of Shane when you're in the field of the damaged party. And so as a result, if I give Mark permission, then Lori's going to be fully liable. You're obligated. But Shalo Bershus, if in fact I don't give Mark permission, well then Havya Shane Bershus Harabim. Then it's like Lori's animal ate Mark's fruit in the public thoroughfare. The Shane Bershus Harabim Patura. And we generally say that when an animal eats fruit of another in the public thoroughfare, that is not going to be a case of liability. We're going to say that there's no liability in that case. Now, remember, we actually said that Lori's would owe the value of the nutrition that the fruit that gave her animals. So she would be obligated to pay sort of the savings in feed that she doesn't have to feed her animal based on that. But she wouldn't be liable the underlying value of the property. Okay, so that was answer number 1. We were unsuccessful. We try answer number 2. Tashma. Another brisa. Again, if you bring your ox into my field without permission, into my courtyard without permission, and now again, so now Mark doesn't bring in fruit, but Mark brings in his ox. And now Lori brings in her ox without permission, and it gores Mark's ox. Well, then patur. Then there's an exemption. There's no liability because Mark brought his in without permission. The im hichnas birshus. However, if Mark had permission to bring in his animal, chayav, then somebody is going to be obligated. Man patur man chayav. Who is it that is chayav? Lav patur balachotzer or chayav balachotzer. Isn't it me, the owner of the field, that we're saying is obligated? And again, we're going to say no. Lo patur bal hashur b'chaya bal hashur. We're talking about the liability of Lori for her animal. Well, 1 second, ihachi my birshus umay shalo birshusika. What does it make a difference whether or not it's permission? Now, here, this is very important because we are in a different situation. Here, we're not talking about Shane. We're not talking about the animal eating Mark's fruit. We're talking about goring. And in the connection with goring, why would there be a difference between whose field it is? So Amrei Hamani Rabbi Tarfon. Now I know why there's a difference between whose field it is, because we're going to say it's Rabbi Tarfon. Remember, Rabbi Tarfon had a very important law that Rabbi Tarfon said that even a tom animal, when it does damage in the field of the damaged party. So if my animal goes into Mark's field and gores Mark's animal, then even though my animal was a tom and therefore ordinarily I only would pay 50% damage, According to Rabbi Tarfon, I have to pay 100% damage. So let's take a look. Mishuna Karen b'chatzar hanizik. He says that it's different to have Karen in the a goring kind of action in the yard of the damaged party, and nezek shalom mishalom, and so therefore you pay full damages. Birishus, but if it was with permission, Havula Karen b'chatzar hanizak. Well, then if the damage was done in the and so as a result, when you have permission, it was damage done in the damaged party's field. Basically, if I give Mark permission to bring his ox in, then my field becomes like it's Mark's field. And so when Lori's ox comes in and gores Mark's ox, Lori's going to be fully liable for the damage. Mishalem nezek shalem. But shalo bershus, havula karen bershus harabim, below mishama elachatzi nezek. And so when I say that you're patur in this brisa, I don't mean fully exempt. I mean just exempt from having to pay full-fledged damages. And so as a result, that's the situation that we're talking about. And again, we tried 2 times to answer the question and suggest that there would be liability, but in fact, we were unsuccessful. And indeed, the location of the Ein Mishpat near Mitzvah seems to suggest that actually you would not be liable for a third party coming in and doing some damage when you are guarding an animal, because you're guarding it against the things that you are bringing in and against your possessions, but not necessarily against something coming in from outside. Okay, so that finishes that discussion, and now we turn to a woman who entered a home to bake bread. And we are going to see that in a situation where a woman enters a home to bake bread, that the baking process involves some revealing of parts of her body that she might not reveal otherwise, specifically her arms, because she's going to want to make sure that presumably when she reaches into the oven that she has no garment that actually could catch fire, and we want her to stay safe. And so as a result, that's going to be an important fact that we will see in a moment. So let's take a look. We have a woman who comes into somebody's house in order to bake. And now a goat belonging to the person who owns the home comes and eats some of the dough. And that leads to the goat having a fever, and the fever causes the goat to die. So who's obligated? So Chayva Rava l'shalume demei barcha. So Rava said to the woman, you have to pay for the goat. So Lema pliga adarav. Maybe we should say that Rava is disagreeing with Rav. Da'amar Rav havyala shalo tochal. Because Rav said that that the person whose food it was could say to the owner of the goat who ate the food and died, why are you eating my food? You shouldn't have eaten my food. And so as a result, given the fact that Rava did not have that statement here and said that the woman was liable, doesn't that mean that Rava disagrees with Rav? And so the answer is no, it does not have to mean that, because Amre, Hachi Hashta, are these cases comparable? Hasam Shalo Birshus, in the case of Rav, where he said that you're not allowed to do it, that was a case where the person came in without permission. Here, the woman came into the house with permission. So lo kabil alayna tirusa. So as a result, when the person brought it in, the owner of the home didn't accept the obligation to guard it from his animal. So hacha birshus. But here she had permission. So kabil alayna tirusa. So maybe she accepted a guarding of the homeowner's animal. 1 second. Well, 1 second. We have a case that we saw back on Mem Zayin Bet yesterday, that a woman who entered a homeowner's home in order to grind wheat and didn't have permission, and we said v'achalasan behemoto shel bala bayas patur. Then if the homeowner's animal ate the wheat, then the the homeowner is exempt and doesn't have to pay for it. And if his animal was damaged, she is going to be liable. Well, taima shelo b'rshus. The reason that she's liable is only because she came in that case, to grind wheat without permission. But ha b'rshus pater. That implies that if she came in with permission, she would not be liable for the damage done to the homeowner's animal. He would be responsible for that, and she would not have to pay. So therefore, Amre Litchon Chitim, that actually grinding wheat is different. Kaven de low bites midi. Since there's no requirement when you grind wheat, you don't need privacy. The woman doesn't need privacy. So low by misalke miravasa de chatzar nafshayu. So as a result, the owner doesn't have to leave his own yard. And therefore he is still present, and so he should guard his animal. But avala meifa, when the woman comes in to bake, kaven de boy hits niusa, since she requires some privacy, because as Rashi says, right opposite the aleph in the that's in the text of the Gemara, that the aleph that is associated with the Ein Mishpat, it says Lemeva Ba'itz Niyusa Shemigalas Roaseha, because she's going to bear her arms. And so as a result, because she's going to bear her arms, so now the man of the house needs to leave the space. And so Miravasa Dechatzer Misalke Navshayu. So he's going to leave the space because he doesn't want to embarrass her, and he doesn't want her to be himself to be embarrassed. But Hilkach Allah Dida Ramya Nirtirusa, and so therefore, in that situation, she's the one who's left with the watching. Now, I will note that the Yam Shel Shlomo says that unfortunately in the times of his life that modesty was not such that bearing arms would actually be a problem. And so as a result, he assumed that therefore if a woman entered in order to bake, the man would not necessarily leave. And so as a result, she would not actually be liable for his property in that situation. And so unless, of course, the person is such that is so modest that that it's known that he would not want to be there. So in any event, the bottom line is that we've answered the question and we've incorporated a new factor into the discussion. Namely, are we going to assume that the owner of the property is going to be able to remain in order to watch his stuff? If he is, well, then he needs to watch his stuff. But if he's forced to leave, well, then we will say that the person who forced him to leave presumably was taking on the obligation to watch his stuff. So now we're going to have three statements of Rava in connection with trespassing. If somebody brought in an ox without my permission, what happens? Three different cases. So let's take a look. We'll scroll up. Here we go. And we're going to have three different cases that Rava is going to teach, three different teachings. So the first two are going to deal with oxen that are going to be brought in without permission. So case number one, ox gets brought in without permission. And that ox, it's a crazy ox. It digs into my field, and it digs a pit or a ditch or even a cave in my field. It was a pretty big ox. It's like a humongous ox. And so you don't usually see an ox doing digging. Certainly wasn't digging with a shovel. It was presumably digging with its hooves. But in any event, Baal Ashur Chayav b'nizkei chatzer. So the owner of that ox, my field, he didn't have permission. He's going to have to pay for the damage he does to my field. Uval chatzer Chayav b'nizkei abor. But I'm going to be obligated if now that somebody creates this pit is now something that could do damage to people, and somebody walks in and gets damaged by this pit, I'm going to be the one who's liable. Now, 1 second. We had a teaching, which we haven't learned inside, but we're going to reference it now, that if a person digs a pit, that's what the pasuk says in Shmo Parakaf Aleph Pasuk Lamed Gimel. the low shore bore. And we don't say that a person is obligated for the pit that their animal digs. Well, then hacha so why is there liability? After all, we should say that there's no liability. So hacha kevan de isla since I'm the owner and I have the ability to fill the pit up and to eliminate the hazard, below kamalye, and I didn't fill the pit up, commander charye dummy, then it's as if I dug the pit myself. Now, Tosas asks a great question here, because I would have thought that if we did say ish bor, the low shore bore, if we did say that teaching, well then, or if we didn't have that teaching, then it would be even more that I would say that it would be the owner of the shore who would be liable, not me, the owner of the field. So kolomar umitocha, that if we take a look, second Tozos on Menchav Amud Aleph, kolomar umitocha, because of this teaching of shore bore. Oh, Mark, they need your help. Okay, all right. So kolomar umitocha hayalanu liftor bala chatzar. So that would imply, so that would imply that because we don't have the bala, that if in fact there we did say sure, if we didn't have this teaching, I'm sorry, that because of the teaching of ish bor below shore bor, that's why the bala chutzner is patur. But ve'im tomer kol shekain de'ilo ma'atin shor shahaya roi liftor bala chutzner. That even more so, if we didn't have this teaching of shore bor, of ish bor below shore bor, that you would say that the person should be, the bala chutzner should be exempt. Because who should be obligated if we say that even if a shore creates a bore, there's going to be liability? That liability would be on the owner of the shore, not on me, the owner of the field. So why are you suggesting? Why does the Gemara suggest that the teaching of shore bore, it makes more of an exemption than the lacking of that teaching? This is why there's the Gemara. This is what the Gemara is trying to say. Afal gavta amar ish bor below shore bor v'hayaraya liftor kol adam. That even though we say that when you say ish bor, that a man creates a bore and not a ox creates a bore, that the point is that would make every person not liable. Shikara, sure, any bore that an ox dug, that would be not liable. There would be no human liability associated with it. Kolomar umitokach hayulan liftor balachotzer, and that's why even the owner of the field would be exempt. That we learn from this pasuk that no human being should be obligated before shakara shore with respect to a bore that was dug out by a shore, a pit that was dug out by a shore. Za'ain svara lidrosh kach. And so ella kavan de alye. And so the only reason that we would say that and apply that is because maybe he would have had that chance to fill it up. Command the curry dummy. And the person who has the opportunity to fill it up, if it's in his field, it's as if he dug it himself. The nira da'afilu im chafru adam davar chiyuvahu chayav bal hachatzer benizke bor. So in any situation where any person would be obligated, so the obligation would end up on the owner of the chutzner for any damage associated with the pit. Because it was on him to fill it up. Because the person who digs it, he has to pay the damage that he did to the field. And so as a result, it becomes like the owner of the field did it himself. So that's the explanation. So, but the bottom line is that teaching number one is that the owner of the animal has to pay for the damage done to the field, but the owner of the field is the one who's going to be liable if somebody comes in and damages themselves on the pit. So Amar Rava, so second teaching of Rava, Hichnish Shoro Lachatzer Balabor Shalober Shos, again, you bring in an ox without permission, Vihizik es Balabayas, and now the ox actually goes ahead and damages the hono, damages me. Oh, Balabayas Huzakbo, or I get damaged over it. And Rashi explains here, Huzakbo, Shaniskabo, I trip over that animal. So Chayiv. So now, because the ox owner did not have any permission to bring it in, I am obligated. However, Ravatz Patur, if the owner, if the animal just dropped, now the question is what does that mean? Ravatz can mean sprinkling or lying down, so we're unclear. So umishum de Ravatz Patur, because the animal dropped down, either sprinkled or lay down, we're going to say it's exempt. So Rav Papa explains, my Ravatz, what does Ravatz mean here? Shehir bits glolim, it dropped some dung, it dropped some manure. The nitanfu kelav shel balabayas. And the damage that we're talking about is damage that happened to the vessels that belong to the homeowner, belong to me. Dahavya glolim bor, because this poop is going to be treated like a bore. It's like a something that doesn't that is not moving and does damage. Below matzina bor shechaya bo as a caleb, and we never find a pit that creates liability for utensils. If the animal falls in, you'll be liable for the damage done to the animal, but you won't be liable for the utensils that are on top of the animal. So Hanicha Shmuel, that makes sense according to Shmuel. Big the Amar called to Kalaborhu. That's because Shmuel says that anything that creates something that somebody could trip over is going to be considered a bore. Doesn't make a difference who owns it. But El Rav, what is Rav going to say about this situation? This dung that falls belongs to the owner of the ox. And so as a result, it's owned. It's an owned property. And so as a result, why would it be considered under the category of bore? It should be considered under the category of shore. And when we have a shore that does damage, it becomes, there's liability even for utensils. So Amrei, so they said, no, because stam glolim afkurim afkerlahu. Basically, people don't want the dung that is left behind by their animals, and so as a result, even Rav would say that this is a case of bore. So that was
back to the thing about oxen digging pits.
Yes,
Texas Longhorn cattle definitely dig.
Really cool.
Yes,
did not know that.
That's actually why the horns are so long. They actually dig for food. They eat roots.
Oh wow. Okay, so there you go. So that
and they're strong enough to dig pretty deeply.
So that actually explains why you might have an animal digging a pit, that it's actually trying to access food. The interesting question
smaller animals such as dogs dig all the time.
Right. The interesting question is whether that would potentially change the nature of the digging from Keren, where an animal causes damage intentionally to cause damage, to Shane, where an animal causes damage when it's trying to actually create benefit for itself. So it's an interesting question of whether maybe the category of the damage would actually change as a result of why the digging is happening. Okay, in any event,
I'm not sure how common it is, but I've also read that at times longhorns will dig in order to establish a hierarchy. Cattle are well known for hierarchies, so they apparently dig for more than just for food.
Okay, well that actually we would have to sort of know why the animal was digging in order to be able to judge the particular case. So we would be a little bit complicated. But all right, so let's take a look at the third trespassing situation. We're done with animal trespass. Now we'll just have a person trespass on his own. And so Ba'amar Rava, nichnas l'chatzer balabayas shelo b'rshus, if a person enters without permission, v'hizik es habalabayas, and he does damage to the owner of the property, o balabayas huzakbo, or the animal owner was damaged through him. And Rashi explains, Huzak, the last Rashi on the page, Omed b'mikomo. The person who came in was just standing in his place. Ubal balabayas v'niskalbo. And now the owner of the property came and tripped over him. So it really wasn't the guy's fault, but it was only his fault in the sense of if he wasn't there, then nothing would have happened in both those situations. So it doesn't make a difference whether it's an affirmative action that the trespasser does or a passive action that causes the damage to the homeowner. In both situations, he's going to be liable. However, hiziku balabayas, if the homeowner did damage to the trespasser, patur, then he's exempt. However, Amar Rav Papa qualifies Rava's ruling. Lo Amran Ela de Lo Haviyadabe. That's only where the person didn't know that the guy was there. If he knew that the person was there, well, then of course he's going to be liable. Why? Because Aval Haba Yadabe, if he knew that the trespasser was there, Hiziku Balabayas Chayav, if the owner of the property does damage to him, he's going to be obligated because my time Mishum de Amar because the guy can say, the trespasser can tell the owner, you have the right to throw me out. But you don't have the right to damage me. And all of this is consistent with Rava and Rav Papa's reasoning. Amar Rava, Rav Papa, that either it was Rava or Rav Papa who said the following. Shneim bershus, if the two people have permission to go into this space, o shneim shelo bershus, or the two people do not have permission to go into this space, hiziku ze etzeh chayav. And if they do damage, affirmative damage to one another, well, then they're both going to be liable for the damage that each of them do. If it's passive liability, well, either they both had permission or they both didn't have permission, and so as a result, Peturin, they're going to be exempt of liability. Taima d'shneim bershus or shneim shelo bershus, because both of them had permission. Aval echad bershus ve'echad shelo bershus, but if one of them has permission, the bershus patur, the one who has permission will not be liable for passive damage. And frankly, and certainly won't be liable for active damage. Shelo bershus chayav, and the other one who did not have permission, not only will he be liable for active damage, but he'll also be liable for passive damage. So as a result, that's all consistent. Now, of course, this assumes that we're talking about a situation where the person who did the damage did not know that the other person was there. That was the statement that Rav Papa had offered. So, okay, so we've got now that detail, and now we have a fourth statement of Rava dealing with trespassing. But now we're going to quote the Mishnah before we go forward. Nafal labor v'hivish meimav chayav. That the situation that we mentioned in the Mishnah was you had an animal fall into a pit that is a cistern for water, and now the water got ruined as a result. And so as a result, the person who brought their animal without permission is going to be liable. That the situation that we're talking about is where the water got ruined when the animal fell in. If it only gets ruined after the animal falls in, patur, then that situation is going to be exempt. My timer, what's the reason? Why would you not be liable if the water only gets damaged after the animal is in the water for some time? Havi shore bore, because that shore would be like a bore, would be like a pit. Umayim kelim, and the water is like a utensil. And we never see a situation where a pit, something that is immovable and doing damage, will create liability for the owner of that pit for utensils, for objects that are not an animal. And so as a result, so that's why you wouldn't be liable for the water or if the damage happens later. But Hanika Shmuel, that works according to Shmuel, because the Amar Kolta Kala Borhu, because Shmuel says that any object that is going to create damage is going to be considered a bore. But according to Rav, the Amar Adamafkerle, he says that you need to make it ownerless. My Ikalamemar. What is there to say? And because this animal presumably is not ownerless when it falls into the pit and falls into the water. And so as a result, it should be considered like a shore. And as a result, even when it does damage later, it should also be liable for the damage to the utensils, namely the water. So Ella Atmar Haki Atmar. So we'll restate Rava's statement, and so that way it can be fit even according to Rav. Amar Rava, this is what Rava meant. Lo shanu ela shehivish megufo. What we're talking about is where the ox did damage immediately by its body. That the body, when it fell in to the pit, that's when it came. That's when it created the damage to the water. And Rashi says, "Migufo shahaya meluchlach batit," that it was dirty with mud, and so as a result, the mud that was on the animal immediately damages the water and makes it not drinkable. And so as a result, now you are the owner of the ox is going to be liable. Aval hivish mirecha. However, if it does damage through its smell, and aval mireche, Rashi says lav gufehu. We're not talking about the body directly. Desarchon de nevela mimela asi la. That when the putridness of a carcass happens on its own. Univela gramahu should go remes lasarchon shiyavo, and it is an indirect result of the decomposition that is going to cause the ruining of the water and the smell that will come. And so as a result, patur, that's where the Rava is going to say it's patur. And it's not patur because it's considered a bore, but rather my taima grama ba'almahu. That is an indirect damage. The direct damage is if the animal causes the water to be ruined immediately through the dirt that's on the animal itself. But a grama ba'alma lo mechayev. But if it's only indirect, because the animal dies in the water, and then the death causes the animal to decompose, and the decomposition then causes the water to be ruined, that is not a direct act, and as a result, you would not be liable for that indirect damage to the water. So that's the fourth statement of Rava. And so now the Mishnah noted that if the trespassing ox fell onto the courtyard owner's father or son, the owner of the ox would need to pay kofar. So the Gemara is now going to attempt to understand why this would be the case. So let's take a look and see. So haya aviv obenod l'toko mishalim as a kofar. V'amai hatamhu. Why would there be obligation to pay kofar? We've seen over the last few days and weeks that the only time that a kofar is obligated is when the animal is a muad. But here we have a situation where presumably the animal is not a muad, and yet we're saying there's an obligation to pay kofar. So three different answers. Answer number one, Amarav b'muad lipol al b'nei adam b'vorus askinan. We're talking about an animal that has a penchant to jump into pits and jump on top of people and kill them. And so that's why that's what we're talking about. And so we are talking about a muad, and therefore we're talking about a situation where the damage is full. So and where kofar is obligated. Well, 1 second, ihachi bar katalahu. If the animal's jumping on top of people to kill them, well, and it's done the very first time it did it intentionally, well, it should be subject to the death penalty. The ox should be, and so it should still never become a muad. So Amar Rav Yosef, Dechaza Yeroka v'nafal. No, we're not talking about where it actually intentionally jumped on the person to kill them. It saw vegetation on the edge of the pit and it fell into the pit. So the ox isn't trying to kill somebody, and as a result will not be subject to the death penalty. And as a result, it has the opportunity to have that kind of death situation happen 3 times while it's a tam, and so it won't be liable during those situations. And the fourth time, it will become a muad and it would be liable. So that's explanation number one. So explanation number two. Shmuel Amar Hamani Rabbi Yossi Aglilihi. Who is this opinion? This opinion is Rabbi Yossi Aglili. De Amar Tam Mishalim Chatzi Kofer. Oh, no, you don't have to worry about saying that when we say that there's kofer that's obligated in our Mishnah, the kofer is chatzi kofer. It's a half kofer. And this is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that just as a tam pays half damages in other situations, so too the tam is going to pay half kofer. Ula Amar, Ula says, no, it's not only Rabbi Yossi Aglili who would say it would be chatzi kofer, but Rabbi Yossi Aglili de Amar Karabi Tarfon. It would be like Rabbi Yossi Aglili if he also agreed with Rabbi Tarfon. And we saw Rabbi Tarfon a few minutes ago, the Amar Karen B'chatzar Nizak, Nezek Shalom Mishalem, that if in fact you do damage on the damaged party's property, you have to pay full damages, even if you are a tam. So Hakanami, Kofer Shalom Mishalem. And so to here, that's why he pays full kofer, because it's on the damaged party's property. And and that's why in our Mishnah we specifically reference the fact that it was the owner's son or father that was in the pit on which the animal fell. And so as a result, it's specifically to tell us that it was in the property of the damaged party, and so that's why there's going to be full kofer. But Elul Shmuel, my area of Ivobano, why does our Mishnah mention the father or the son? Afilu Acharnami, doesn't make a difference who it is that's there. If there would be chatzi nezek, chatzi kofer, and because it's a tam animal. So Orche de Milsa Katani. So the Gemara explains, no, the Mishnah is just telling us the ordinary case. The ordinary case is a case where you have a father or son there, and so that's why the Mishnah specifically mentions that. Okay, so now the Mishnah noted next that when the ox was brought into the courtyard with permission, the owner of the courtyard will be liable for damage. But Rebbe says that the owner of the courtyard is only liable if he explicitly accepts the obligation to protect the ox of the guest. So the question is who do we follow? So we're going to have a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. So let's take a look. That's what the Tanna Kamma says. And Rebbe says that you're not chayav until you accept until the owner actually explicitly accepts the obligation. So Itmar, Rav Amar Hilchas Tanna Kamma, Ushmuel Amar Hilchas Rebbe. That Rav says like it's that halakha is like the Tanna Kamma, that you're obligated, and Rebbe says no, you're not obligated until you're explicit about it. If it's only implicit, you're not going to be liable. So Tana Rabbanan, we have a brisa, and Knos Shorcha v'Shamaru. You bring your ox in, and you need to guard it. Hizik chayiv. So if that ox does damage to my property, so then the owner of the ox is going to be liable. Huzuk putter. But if it's damaged, I'm going to be exempt because I told you need to guard your animal. Knos shorcha ba'aniyesh merenu. On the other hand, if I tell you bring your ox in and I'm going to watch it, well then huzuk chayav. Now if that ox is damaged, well then I'm going to be liable. And hizik, if that ox does damage to my property, well then patur. You are going to be exempt. So as a result, that's the story. But Haguv Yakasha, we end up with a brisa that is internally inconsistent, because the debate between the Tanna Kamma and Rebbe in our Mishnah is about what happens if one is silent. And now we have two statements that are both explicit. And the implication of each explicit statement is that the opposite is true if one is silent. Let's take a look as the Gemara will build it for us. Hagufakasha. It's internally inconsistent. Amra kanos shorchach v'shamru. I tell you to bring your ox in and guard it. Hizikaya huzak patur. If it does damage, so then to my property, then the owner is going to be liable. But if I do that, but if my property does damage to it, I will not be liable because I told you to watch it. Why? Time shamro. I told you to watch it. So dechayav bala shor upater bala chatzar. That's why the owner of the ox is going to be liable, and the owner of the field, namely me, is going to be exempt. But hastama, if I didn't tell you anything, if I just told you that you could bring your animal in, what's the implication? The implication is that I would be obligated for any damage done to it because I presumably am saying that I'm going to watch it, and you will be exempt for bringing your ox in because I implicitly told you that I would watch it. Because presumably, when I don't say anything, I am accepting on myself the obligation to watch it. That's like the Tanakama. But Ema Seifa, listen to the Seifa. If I tell you to bring your shore in and I will watch it, well, then if it's damaged, well, then I'm going to be obligated. But if it does damage to others, well, then I'm not going to be obligated. And you're not going to be obligated. So what's the reason that that you are not liable and I am liable? It's because I told you I was going to watch it. What's the implication? That's the only situation where I'm going to be obligated as the owner of the field, and you're going to be exempt as the owner of the ox. Hastama, if I only just tell you to bring the animal in, and I don't specifically tell you that I'm going to watch it, what's the implication? Then presumably the owner of the ox, you, the owner of the ox, is going to be obligated. And I, the owner of the field, will be exempt. Because presumably I'm not accepting on the obligation to watch when I don't say anything. So the beginning of our brisa implies that if I don't say anything, I'm taking on the watching obligation. And in the end of the brisa, the implication of the brisa is that if I don't say anything, I'm not taking on the obligation to watch. So Atan Rabbi, so that comes out to be Rabbi's opinion. Damar Achi Rusa Baal Habayas Lishmor, right? That until he accepts on himself the obligation, the homeowner does not have an obligation to watch it. Reisha Rabbanan, V'Sefer Rebbe. So in the end, we have the beginning of the Mishnah, the beginning of this brisa, excuse me, is like the rabbis, the Tanakama, and the end of the brisa is like Rebbe. So three different answers to explain. Amar Lazar Tavra. Yeah, it's contradictory. Misha Shanazo, Lo Shanazo. The person who taught the first part of that brisa is not the same person who taught the second part of the brisa. That's answer number one. Answer number two, offered by Rava. Rava Amar, Kula Rabbanan. It's all the rabbis. So how do we explain the second part of the brisa? I did the nasiv Reisha Shamro because the first part of the brisa told us about guarding, and so as a result, Tana Seva Va'aniyesh Merenu. So in the end of the brisa, it also referenced guarding, but really, even if the owner of the land did not say anything, it would not. He would have to guard it because it all follows the rabbis. So that would not be necessary. So that's approach number two. So approach number two is that really the last words of the brisa weren't necessary to be said, but it was only said in order to create parallel language. Rav Papa Amar Kula Rebbe. Rav Papa says, no, really, this entire brisa is Rebbe. So how do we understand the first part of the brisa? We need to explain that because the first part of the brisa implied if you said nothing, then you were taking on an obligation to watch. The Savar La Rebbe Tarfon. Rebbe must hold like Rebbe Tarfon in this brisa, or whoever's the author of this would agree with both Rebbe and Rebbe Tarfon. Damar Karen B'Chatzar Nizak Nezek Shalom Mishalim. Again, remember that Rebbe Tarfon says that when you do Karen, when you have goring damage, and it's in the property of the person who was damaged, you need to pay full damages. Hilkach Amar Le Shamro. So now we can understand when I say to you that you need to watch your ox, lo makni le makom b'chatzar. What I'm really telling you is when you bring your ox in, don't consider this your field. It's not your field. V'havule Karen b'chatzar hanizak. And so as a result, if my animal gores your animal, it is going to, it is, I'm sorry, if your animal gores my animal, it's going to be Karen in the chutzner of the nizak. It's going to be goring in my property because your animal does not have permission to be in this property. I mean, it has permission to be in this property, but it's not considered your property for that purposes. The Karen b'chutzner on nizak mashalom nizak shalom, and so that's why you would be obligated to pay me full damages. However, lo amr le shamro, if I just tell you that you can bring it in, I'm not actually telling you that I'm going to watch your animal, but I am telling you, I am making it as if the field also belongs to you. And so as a result, our field is now, my field is now considered a partnership field with you. And as a result, now if your animal does damage to my animal, you won't be obligated in full. The Karen b'chatzar shutafin ena mishalom el chatzi nezek. And so as a result, because your animal is a tom animal, you won't be obligated to pay me in full, but rather you will be only obligated to pay me 50% of the damages. And so as a result, according to Rav Papa, we actually end up with three cases. The two explicit cases that are mentioned in the brisa, where I say specifically you need to watch, and the case where I say I'm going to watch, where the liability is full in one direction or the other. But the implicit third case is actually different from the other two cases. That in fact, where I don't say anything, now it is no longer as if the field specifically belongs to me, but rather it belongs to the two of us. And so as a result, if your ox were to gore my ox, we would only pay half damages, and that would be presumably in the other direction as well. And so therefore, we now have the explanation of that brisa, and indeed, there is a debate as to whether or not we paskin like Rav or Shmuel in this. Usually we paskin like Shmuel in monetary issues, and that would suggest that we would follow Rebbe, which would mean that you are only obligated in situations where you explicitly take on the obligation. That's certainly a clear rule that would make a lot of sense. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to talk about payment for causing miscarriage, and we will, God willing, pick up with that tomorrow. Looking forward to continuing our learning.
Steinfeld has a halakhic note, and he says that there actually are authorities that posking like Rav and the rabbis on this.
Yes, that is 100%. The note here also notes that as well. Despite the fact that usually the Rif paskins here like Shmuel, but there's a variety of different positions that are noted throughout. And so as a result, it's not necessarily as clear as ordinarily the case in this situation, whether we paskin like the rabbis or Rebbe.
Who's obligated?
I'm sorry, say that question, Ken, again.
The shutafim, who is obligated then? The Bala Shor or the Bala Sadeh?
So in the shutafim case that we talked about, where we're following Rebbe, and the person doesn't say anything, then whoever's animal did the damage is going to be obligated to pay 50% of the damages. It's going to be treated like a shor b'rishos harabim. That when you have a field of shutafim, then that field of shutafim is basically treated like a rishos harabim with respect to those two partners. And so as a result, there would not be any Shane damages, because Shane has to be in the field of in a particular person's field, and there would be the rules, the traditional rules of Tom would apply, even according to Rebbe Tarfon. That even Rebbe Tarfon, who says that you follow that when it's damage in the property of the damaged party, you pay 100%. Here, because it's a shutafin field, you would be paying Tom damages. You would be paying ordinary Tom damages, and you would not pay 100% of the damage. You pay 50%.
The one who causes the damage, the owner of the shore that caused the damage.
Correct. The owner of the shore that causes the damage. Exactly. Exactly. And I love the background. I don't know much whether that's intentional in order to emphasize that we're dealing with animals at the moment, but if it is, then it's especially nice. And if not, it's a wonderful coincidence.
Yeah, this is actually practical halakha because animals do get rented out or lent out for different purposes from time to time.
Oh, 100%. And in that, well, of course, when we will be seeing shortly enough all the rules associated with different kinds of watchers, and of
Yeah.
course that will bring in another whole element of this, because right now we're assuming that there's no special liabilities associated with the situation.
Yeah,
And so,
it's not just farmers and ranchers. It's zoos are constantly sending animals from one place to another.
oh, 100%.
Many of
Although,
them dangerous.
and of course, there are various interesting political ramifications that are associated with that, as we see, given the fact that there are no pandas in DC any longer.
There are
So,
no pandas in the United States, I think.
yes, exactly. That's right.
Wow.
No pandas in the United States. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Look forward to continuing our learning tomorrow. Be
For
well.
sure.